Welcome to the 14th episode of Heydorn and Watson, Douglas Social Credit. Today we will be talking about the benefits that the Douglas Social Credit economic and monetary reform will have for one particular cohort or group in society, a common group, that is students. How say the national dividend and increased purchasing power and economic security that is provided by Douglas Social Credit via the national dividend will go a long way to help students to pay for and complete their studies and attain their degrees or qualifications that they're desiring to attain with relative security and comfort, which is certainly not the case at the moment, where we've got students pretty much living on a lot of them living on the edge of poverty and struggling, having to take jobs, even multiple jobs, to pay for their tuition fees for their study courses, and then by the time they finish it, they're loaded with enormous debts that can range from into five-figure debts, even to six-figure debts. So yeah. So and you, Oliver, in particular, you could relate to this very well, in that you were a student yourself for a long time, and had to
Yes,
deal with these concurrent problems.
yes, that's right. I was a student for a bachelor's, a master's, and a PhD,
Mm.
and particularly at the bachelor's level, the situation, it's worse now, of course, than when I went to school, because tuition is higher and the cost of living is higher. But yeah, when I started university at 17 in the 90s, uh, even though I did get some assistance or some scholarships and so forth, nevertheless, I was forced to go into debt, and I also worked part time for a number of years while I was at school, and so I was forced to go into debt even though I was working part time. Wasn't earning enough money from the part time work, which was I was doing while during the school year.
Mm.
And
Mm.
I also had, sometimes I would have summer jobs and what have you, but you'd never earn enough to cover all of your costs. So by the time I was finished, I had something like $25,000 in student debt. And I
Mm.
think,
Sheesh.
yeah, the way the system operates now, it's really quite insidious, because, and I'm speaking from a Canadian perspective. It might be a bit different in the States. Well, it's probably in some ways it's probably worse in the States.
Mm.
But you know, in order to get into a Canadian university, especially a top tier university, you had to have very high marks in high school, and over 80% in your OACs, for example, just to be considered, and
Mm.
so that was an A minus average. So you had to work very hard in order to get that. You had to apply yourself.
Mm.
Well, you had to have talent, and you had to apply yourself. And you would think that in an honest and just world, that hard work would earn you, just that by itself would earn you a spot at a university, and with your expenses paid for. But under the existing
Yes.
system, although you've worked very hard and you've earned a spot at the university, you haven't been earned enough money, or any money necessarily, to pay for your education, to pay for your living
Mm.
costs. And so it's almost like you're being charged twice. You're expected to work very hard, get the marks in order to be able to get in, But on top of that, you also have to pay in financial terms just for the opportunity to continue studying.
Gosh.
Yeah. And so, um, that's a lot of pressure to put on a very, not even an adult. I was only 17, or, and a lot of people, they enter at 18 or 19, they're still very young. And to have them, starting to get into debt at such a young age without a job, without knowing whether they're going to get a job to be able to put it off, it's very destructive because it's adding financial pressure on top of all the academic pressures.
Yes.
So I don't want to get all conspiratorial, but if you talk about trauma-based mind control, there is something very, I would say, diabolical about the existing system where academically, speaking again within the Canadian context, it can be very rigorous, unreasonably so. And then on top of it, you're piling on all this financial pressure, all this debt, and necessity of having to work while you're studying full time and things like this. It's not. It doesn't make for health or for for proper functioning.
Gosh.
So now on the flip side of it, I mean, we do recognize that the universities have costs and that somebody has to meet those costs. The money to pay those costs, to cover those costs, has to come from somewhere. And the beauty of social credit is that if we gave people national dividends and students received a national dividend, so a payment every month of debt-free credit, and they also enjoyed compensated prices, then I would think that when you look at what students have to pay even now, that tuition is higher than when I went to school, and living costs have increased as well. Nevertheless, in a social credit system, you wouldn't have that inflation, but it would be enough. The dividend with the compensated retail prices, it would be enough to help a student, even a student that was living on campus or a student that was living at home, to cover their tuition and their basic living costs without the necessity of going into debt and without the necessity of having to work part-time during the school year in order to, so it would be, for students, social credit would be great, and
Absolutely.
the universities would get the money that they need. We're not asking them to offer their services for free. They would get the money that they need, and the people that support the students in terms of board and lodging, they would get the money they need, and then the students wouldn't be subject to unnecessary and extreme financial stress.
Yep, that's right. It would be an absolute godsend. I mean, it would be. I can only imagine these, a lot of these students who go and undertake the study, which is a pretty well a full-time job unto itself. To get a lot of these degrees. Because of the work that the universities lay out for them, and then they have to get paid jobs on top of that. I just don't know how they would do it. It must be horrendously stressful.
Yes.
Overloading. So just by giving them all a dividend, or just by them getting a dividend, it would take off so much stress and pressure, and it would actually help them or enable them to study and perform at their academic studies much better.
Yes,
so they'll improve their marks, their performance in the classroom.
Yes. Well, this is one of my pet peeves with the way the system is set up right now. If it's in society's interest for students to do well, then society should find a way to financially support students adequately so that they can go to their full-time university job of studying and not have to sort of be weighed down by all sorts of other pressures and stresses right? Because as you say, going to school full-time at a university, that is a full-time job. And by doing the work that they're doing, they're already earning
That's
the
right.
right to be there. So the
Yes.
financial system under which we live should be organized in such a way that the financial support necessary to meet tuition and other fees is automatically forthcoming. And social credit is the monetary system that would do that.
Yes.
And so, but you're absolutely right. I mean, it's ridiculous. If you want students to do well, you want them to perform at their best and to learn efficiently, effectively, etc., while maintaining mental, emotional health and physical health, then you don't want a system that's going to require them to work part-time while they're at school, or that's going to indebt them, you know, with large sums of money so that when they come out,
Yes.
they've got this debt stone hanging around their necks. I mean, it's completely
Yeah.
counterproductive. And
Totally.
goodness knows what the fallout must be in terms of, uh, well, I mean, society itself suffers because students can't
Mm.
learn properly
Yeah.
in a
That's
healthy,
right.
supportive environment. So,
That's right.
um, but I should point out too that there is an aspect here where class or inequality rears its ugly head because of course
Hmm.
if you are from a family where both parents are working, or maybe one parent is working but that parent is making a large salary. So if your parents are making more than six figures or whatever,
Mm.
um, then they might be in a position, as some of my friends were, to pay for everything, to pay the tuition
Yes.
and to pay for board and lodging at a residence on campus and so on and so forth for all 4 years of let's say of the bachelor's degree. And
Yes.
um, and so that means that those people that are coming from a more well-off background are are not dealing with the financial pressure and are not having the necessity of becoming indebted, or are not going and having to do part-time jobs while they're studying, and so it gives them an unfair
Mm.
advantage.
Yeah. It certainly does.
Hmm.
It's very unfair.
Hmm.
Yeah. When they just got it when everyone should have that, at
Right,
least to some extent.
right, right.
Yeah. Because they need, in order to develop your mind intellectually and to learn things, to engage in academic work, you really you require financial stability. You need to be free from other stresses
Hmm.
and disruptions
Yes,
in order to engage in academic work.
that's right.
Otherwise, you can't think or concentrate properly.
Well, exactly.
Yeah,
And
and that's the cause of a lot of people, a lot of students dropping out of their
yes,
courses.
absolutely.
Yeah. And they still end up in debt for the time they did spend at college or university or
Hmm.
whichever.
Hmm.
Yes, sorry, what were
Yes,
you going to say?
and even those people that are from a rich background, for lack of a better word, whose parents can't afford to cover all of these expenses, even they would be better off under social credit because now the parents would be off the hook, right? The parents
That's
wouldn't
right.
have to pay for their kids. The kids would be able to pay for themselves if they had a
That's right.
dividend and compensated prices. So that it benefits everybody. That's the point I want to
Of
make.
course. Oh, that
Yeah,
exactly. It doesn't just benefit the poor, it will benefit everyone.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
So,
So, but the point that you make is very, very important. I'll tell two stories. When I was teaching last in Arkansas, at the University of Arkansas Fort Smith, there I had a colleague who was a political scientist, and he had studied in Florida, and of course the tuition and very often the living costs at American schools are much higher than what they are in Canada, because in Canada the government subsidizes um,
mhm.
you know regular run of the mill university quite heavily. um,
Yeah.
But he was telling us that he had, I think, over $100,000 in student debt. Um,
Oh, sheesh.
and that he was in his 40s at the time. He'd be in his mid 50s now. And he
Yeah.
was saying that by the time he uh, retires, he'll still be paying off student debt.
Oh my gosh.
So under those conditions, he didn't feel comfortable getting a mortgage or taking on
Mm.
another huge debt, and he just would rent. But can you imagine
Yeah.
a university professor? And we weren't paid well. The university paid us peanuts, and that's a
Yeah.
fact. I mean, it was abysmal what we were paid. It was an insult, really.
Gosh. It really
Um,
is.
and so that explains why, even as a university professor, with the student debts that he had to pay, he was not did not feel comfortable with taking on a debt and as a mortgage and buying a house. And so you have a university professor who's been a product of the system, who is basically forced to rent,
Yeah.
as if he was just working at uh, maybe a minimum wage job or something, because
Mm.
that's all he can afford
Yeah.
to do.
Yeah.
So so it has consequences not just for students, but for people that once were students,
Yeah.
later on in life. And in the States, and I'm not quite sure what the situation is here in Canada, but in the States, I think you're not even allowed to declare bankruptcy.
Gosh.
So,
Really?
well, you can declare,
So,
what I mean is, you can declare bankruptcy for all sorts of other debts, but not for student loans.
oh, I see.
Uh,
Okay.
so, we're one step removed from reinstituting debtors' prisons.
Yeah.
You know,
Pretty much. Yeah.
uh,
Certainly sounds like it.
yeah, and if these loans are made to private banks, then of course it's not just the principal, but it's the interest that has to be paid back. And if you're paying it
Yeah.
back slowly, because that's all you can afford to do, like this fellow with $100,000 paying it back very slowly, um, it can take not just take a long time, but it's a lot of money you're paying in interest. Right?
Oh,
So
it would be horrendous.
yeah, so what are you working for? For whom are you working?
Yeah.
You're working to put
Mm.
money in the pockets of private bankers at that point.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
So for money that was created out of nothing, and that's it's just intangible, abstract numbers that
Yeah.
you needed,
Yeah.
and that the economy needed, but you have to pay for it.
Yeah.
Principal plus long term interest, which could be thousands upon thousands of dollars. So
Mm.
yeah,
So, yeah, it's like what you were saying before. The financial system. It's really what you said. It's evil.
yes,
It's so insidious
yeah, especially for
in a
people
way.
that are in a vulnerable, weak position.
Yeah. So like students.
Hmm.
Students are one of those examples.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another story that I'll tell is that I know that the university I was working at, it was often the case that students would be encouraged to come to the college, and there are all sorts of programs, remedial programs, to try to get them up to par and things like this. And I believe myself that in many cases it was clear to the administration or to the faculty that were running those programs that certain students, university wasn't the place for them, but
Yeah.
the university needed the money. And so, like you were
Oh.
saying, you have all these cases where students are lured, perhaps with false promises. They get into debt, and then a year, 2 years, 2.5 years in, they figure, what, they can't really hack it. It's not really the place for them,
Yeah.
and then they have to leave without a degree, but they've got all that
And
massive debt.
they're loaded with debt.
Yeah.
So
So
the universities, they pretty much coax or fool these people into enrolling in their courses, even though they're not
yeah,
cut out for it, and they
even though they're
know they're
not cut
not
out
cut
for it.
out for it.
Yeah.
And but they still still let them in anyway,
Yeah.
just so they can put them in debt to them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, they need the money, and they'll get it by hook or by crook. The other point, of course, and this applies to I think all universities in the known cosmos, at least in the Western world. You have situations too where the degree is practically worthless economically by the time the
Yep.
student graduates. In fact, it might be a sort of degree that makes them unemployable.
Yeah,
And
that's
yet,
true.
the universities, there's no informed consent. The universities don't go out of their way or don't make any attempt to say, well, we've got this faculty of whatever, this department of whatever it is, but if you want to major in this field, that's fine. But do you clearly understand that your prospects at getting employment are, nil?
Yeah.
Because it's a huge investment of time, energy, and of course money. And people, the universities are selling something. People should know up front what the economic ramifications are of studying certain things, and the universities may not always be in a position to predict that to a T because things change and so on and so forth, but they could at least give them the information that they have at the moment. Well, here's what's happened in terms of employment. Here are statistics with former graduates. Here's what they're doing now, so that people will know that they might need to go then to a community college to do some practical program, or they might need to do some other degree afterwards, because otherwise it's sort of a dead end. And I think they do have a moral responsibility to make that clear to the students.
That's
before
right,
the students
they do.
sign up.
Morality and common sense would dictate that they should do that. They should inform the students about the job prospects for each degree or qualification. But obviously, a lot of universities today are very corrupt. So they will deliberately avoid informing the students of their job prospects. So for a lot of the degrees that are pretty well useless for getting a job, they'll still dole them out anyway, as long as the students hand over the money.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So you combine all those things with the financial system on top of it, with all of the pressures, and it's just a recipe for a lot of unnecessary suffering, a lot of unnecessary dysfunction. And it's social credit offers a way out. Is anyone listening? Is anyone paying attention?
Good question.
That would be our question.
Yes.
But the answer is there. The solutions are there. So it's a question of people taking an interest in their own problems and taking the initiative, and doing something to fix what is really a quite insane setup.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So
they have the means. They've only got to exploit it.
That's right.
Make use of it. Yeah. Another thing I'll point out, just in relation to, it's just in relation to what we were talking about before with universities doling out degrees regardless of job prospects. It is the case today, and you would know this very well, Oliver, that universities today and degrees have just become consumer products. They have no longer, at least most of them are no longer, represent any real value or, say, even academic achievement or intelligence or whichever. This university have just become commercial enterprises, degree factories. Students hand over the money, and they give them the degree if they complete all the very linear, often monotonous, perhaps even at times questionable academic work that they set out for the students.
Yes, I think that's true. The financial system, the financial system we live under, because there's this gap between prices and incomes, and because we have to have continuous economic growth as one of the major methods of filling that gap and distributing more income so we can have equilibrium, it corrodes everything. It denatures everything.
Yes.
So very often, you're right. I think that you don't really have universities as we once had them in the Western world decades ago. This is especially
No.
true in the United States, but not only there. Where it's no longer learning for the sake of learning or expanding the boundaries of knowledge, just for its own sake. It's
Mm.
preparing people for the workplace, and it's
Yeah.
and there's a whole dimension of social engineering, especially in certain
That's right.
areas like the social sciences and humanities, that it's not really
Yeah.
about open investigation and
Yeah.
free
That's
thinking in
right.
service of
It's
truth.
just that's right.
Things like
It's
that.
they're just tools or conduits for various ideological agendas.
Yeah, for various vested
Uh,
interests. So, um,
Especially the faculty of sociology.
hmm,
That's just pretty much a lot of agenda pushing there,
yes,
at least for the most part. Um,
yes,
and there's also, I'll point out that I think in the Western world, especially in the States, um, college, or college as they call it there, in their accent, it's become almost now a kind of rite of passage. I mean, it's becoming like that in the rest of the world now too, but
hmm,
United States, I think that's where it started. It's just become a rite of passage where these kids are taught they're taught from the cradle that if they don't go to college, they're going to be failures.
hmm,
I mean, it couldn't be any further from the truth.
hmm,
Unless you're doing engineering or science or medicine or something like that, a lot of, as we said before, a lot of degrees, you have a diddly squat chance of finding employment, at
hmm,
least fairly soon after you complete the degree.
hmm,
And also it's created social stigmas where people who don't go to college and get
hmm,
that achieve that rite of passage of getting a college degree, they're looked down upon.
hmm, hmm,
They're looked down upon as stupid or failures, or
hmm,
um, you know that treated as the underclass or whichever.
yeah, yeah,
And so so it's like it's a bit of a paradox. On one side, they've decided everybody's got to get degrees.
hmm,
So by doing that, it devalues the university degree.
hmm, hmm,
And then people who don't get these degrees, these degree certificates with their names on it and fancy writing, they're pretty much subhuman entities
yeah, yeah,
in society.
right,
But I mean, even that now couldn't be any further from the truth,
mm,
especially nowadays, where even there's a lot of jobs now
hmm,
that require that don't require university degrees, but are getting far better paid,
hmm,
far better paying than a lot of jobs that you would get from acquiring a degree.
yes, yes, that's right.
Isn't that ironic?
It's quite ironic.
Things like the technical trades,
Hmm. Plumbing.
um, certain types of technical engineers, experts, and various sort of bit more practical, hands-on sort of thing.
Hmm, hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, no, that's
So,
that's true. There are a lot of people in the universities today which, in my opinion, don't really belong there. And
hmm.
we don't need. It's not the case that everyone should go to university. It was never that way.
No.
But
Oh
if you're going to
no,
have
no. I
everyone
mean,
coming into university, it's going to change the nature of the university.
that's right. It'll change the
So,
dynamics. There was in once upon a time in the past, not even everyone went to school. Not
yeah.
everyone even got a primary education.
Mm.
And only even up to say 70 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
only a small minority of people actually went to college,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and they got through college via scholarships.
Mm-hmm.
They was pre-selected because they say they got very high marks at school, so they were pre-selected
Mm-hmm.
and sponsored to go to university.
Mm-hmm.
So the process for getting into university in the past was much more selective, and the standards were a lot higher. I'd say probably a lot better quality,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and were more meaningful. Otherwise, now where they've just been devalued and reduced to um, consumer products and rites of passage.
Mm. Yes.
For the middle class.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, no, that's it's all true. Yeah, so the bottom line is that social credit would be a great thing for
Mm.
students and a great thing for learning. So anyone who is a student or was a student or will be a student, and anyone who has any concern
Mm.
for learning in society and supporting it should get on the social credit bandwagon.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Absolutely.
I think we've covered most of what we're going to say on this particular topic. So
Yeah. I think so.
we will join our viewers next week for another episode. And please subscribe. Please leave any comments or questions that you have, and we will talk to you next week.
Yeah.
Alrighty.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Heydorn.
Thank you, Michael. Take care.
You're welcome.
Bye bye.
You too. Bye bye.